Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the IISS for our discussion meeting today on Egypt's transition fatigue, a Russian perspective. Some 26 days ago, Egypt's military deposed President Mohamed Morsi following protests against his rule by liberals, leftists and secularists. Since then, opponents and supporters have regularly staged huge demonstrations in Cairo and elsewhere, while the military has appointed an interim government to review the constitution and to take the country, we hope, to fresh elections. The January 2011 ouster of the long-serving president, Hosni Mubarak, came as a profound shock to many countries, Russia included. Moscow took time to establish ties with Morsi and other moderate Islamists across the region. Despite the military's intervention at the start of this month, the Muslim Brotherhood remains a potent force in a country that is divided politically and socially. Our speaker today is a great friend of the IISS, Professor Vitaly Namkin, Director of the Institute of Oriental Studies under the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow. He's also a professor and chair at Moscow State University and was guest professor at the University of California, Berkeley. He's an expert in the history and politics of the Arabic world and Islamic world, as well as Central Asia and the Caucasus. Professor Namkin.
Thank you. So, as far as I know, I have half an hour for presentation, then question and answer period. So let's start with some preliminary results of what's happening or what has happened in Egypt during the last years and months. So I'll try to be as concise as possible because the events are developing so quickly that probably we need more than 1 hour, 2 hours to elaborate on some scenarios or evaluations. But first, so my first point is to concentrate on certain preliminary conclusions or what we can see from the recent developments in this country. So first, which is probably trivial and well known, that the Egyptian society turned to be deeply polarized and very much divided. So it's not new, we knew about that, but what is important, that the main line of this division goes not through or is not dividing two main segments of the society. One is Islamist-oriented, the second secular. It's much more complicated because what we can see that certain segments of even of the more radical and conservative organizations than the Muslim Brothers supported the military coup, like An-Nur party, the Salafis. And even as far as I know from my personal contacts, even some people from the Muslim Brothers were not very happy with what President Morsi was doing, which was, in their view, harmful to the strategic interests of the Muslim Brotherhood. It was too hasty, he was too inexperienced and trying to do everything at once. So there are much more complicated divisions, but still we have this vision of a divided society, a fragmented society, which gives us, opportunity to say that the Syrian scenario or the scenario of a civil war is not completely impossible, though I believe personally that Egypt can escape such a scenario. It is mature enough, not to repeat, and especially the Egyptian military, and as well as the Muslim Brothers. So we can say also that Morsi managed to alienate many segments of this society, including his brothers from the Salafi movement, An-Nur party, God knows what is in the mind of the leaders of An-Nur, whether it's this support of the military coup is dictated by their desire probably to attract some people from the electorate of the opposition against Morsi, including Islamists, as well as some people from the Muslim Brothers, hoping that the forthcoming elections will make them winners instead of the Muslim Brothers, which cannot be excluded because, as far as I can preliminary judge, I might be mistaken, but my judgment is that the Salafis in general are becoming more popular in the Arab street, in the Egyptian street, and they have a lot of chances. If there is a vote tomorrow, for instance, in the elections, the Salafis can get much more than they got during the elections that were held in Egypt. So, but the question is why it happened. What was the reason? What was the main mistake of Morsi? Oh, by the way, coming back to the complexity of this support, I should mention also that Al-Azhar, which is one of the most powerful Islamic organizations, though very bureaucratic and connected with the former regime, also supported the military coup. Al-Azhar is extremely influential as the main theological and educational Islamic institution, having more than 8,000, a network of more than 8,000 high school and primary schools all over the country, and having issuing fatwas, and the fact that Al-Azhar also supported the military coup is extremely important for understanding the reality in Egypt. So, I think that coming back to the question why it happened, whether it was some authoritarian, behavior of Morsi which made him not popular, whether it was tendency towards so-called Ikhwanization of Egypt or monopolizing power in favor of the Muslim Brothers, which was against a lot of interests of many segments of the society, or it was a failure of meeting the demands of the masses of Egyptians, economically, politically, though I cannot imagine that anyone who can come to power in Egypt can solve these extremely difficult problems of social, economic, character quickly in 1 year, given the disastrous state of the Egyptian economy, especially now after this military coup, where even the tourist sector, so I know this from the numbers of Russian tourists who were still coming in large quantities, large numbers to Egypt last year, but now even Russian tourists who are going everywhere hesitate in buying tours to go to the Red Sea. So whether it's the problem is, so whether another question, whether the reason was that Morsi, as some of his colleagues say about his main mistake, that he should have destroyed so-called deep state in Egypt, which is army, security, judiciary, and so on. So the fact is that this deep state, which is extremely powerful, the most probably important actor in the Egyptian home politics, of course, they were not very comfortable with the rule of the Muslim Brothers, and the fact that Morsi couldn't do anything about this deep state and tried to change the whole system, the constitution and everything without destroying it, it was his mistake. I think it's very dangerous view because it means that if the Muslim Brothers come back to power, either through election or through any other process, they learned lessons from this experience. They have to do something against the military, against the security forces, against the interior forces, in order to provide for them a comfortable situation for things, especially learning lessons from the Turkish experience, where the Erdogan's party practically made the Turkish military incapable of confronting his party. So we can also, so another, the second conclusion is that, as I said, that the Islamists themselves in Egypt are extremely polarized, and probably there will be a regrouping of different Islamic groups, especially if there are elections next year. Whether, though I'm not very sure that, quite sure that they can do that, but still in these directions, before the elections, we can, I think, we'll witness serious regrouping, reorganization of the so-called Islamic camp or Islamic front in Egypt, which consists of many groups and parties with very difficult relationship between them. The third result, which is very important of these developments, is that the coup led to a dramatic shift in the geopolitical situation in the Middle Eastern region. As you know, Turkey opposed the coup, which is understandable, criticized the action done by the military. Of course, they were thinking about themselves. But the most strange thing was that after 3 days after coup, the Iranians decided also to oppose the coup. So the Iranians and the Turks, the Turkish leadership and the Iranian leadership, found themselves in one group of the opponents of the new regime in Egypt, which is strange because, for instance, in Syria, they're confronting each other. But here, despite the fact that Turkey is very much now opposed to the Iranian involvement in the Syrian conflict, you know, Turkey and Iran are together opposing Iran, though for different reasons and with different agendas, because the Iranians are speaking about Western Israeli conspiracy, and the Turks are speaking about the developments which are not compatible with the democracy and toppling democratically elected president is not in favor of the Middle East and for the benefit of the whole region. I think the fourth thing, which is also important, is repercussions for the sister Muslim Brotherhood organizations in the region, like in Syria, in Yemen, and Jordan, and for Nahda party in Tunisia. We already are witnessing serious developments in Tunisia, and a lot of analysts, my colleagues, for instance, in Russia, are speaking about the possibility of repeating such a scenario, the Egyptian scenario in Tunisia, despite the fact that Nahda leaders are much more mature and much more, I think, cautious in doing things in this country. But it cannot be excluded. Of course, the damage done to the Muslim Brothers in general is very big. I can quote here one of the analysts from the region who said that President Gamal Abdel Nasser tried to eliminate the Muslim Brothers. Sadat tried to do the same. Mubarak tried to do the same. But it was only President Morsi who managed to destroy them totally. So my fifth conclusion is that I would say that it put a lot of global actors in a difficult position, especially the West and the United States, because the Arab Street is now very, in Egypt and a lot in many other countries, is, I would say, extremely anti-American and anti-Western, which is bad, I think, for stability and security. And first, especially the United States was accused in supporting dictators. Now the United States is accused of supporting the Islamists, of the Muslim Brothers. And God knows what's going to happen afterwards. So it's general distrust. But I think that despite the fact that we have different views on Syria and on many other issues among Russia and the West, I think what now Catherine Ashton is doing is very constructive, trying to reconcile two camps in Egypt. But this distrust is making this mission not impossible, but very difficult, I would say, very difficult. Difficult not because there is such distrust towards the European Union. The Egyptian authorities understand that, and excluding the Muslim Brothers, but they feel deceived. They feel betrayed. That's their feeling. But the real, I think, reason why they are rejecting until now to have a meeting with Catherine Ashton is not because of this distrust, but because, in my view, because of the fact that they are still having a very acute debate about their strategies. They're in the process of discussing these strategies, and I believe that we'll witness, some time will pass before they make some conclusion about what to do afterwards and what strategy to choose. So, in general, I think that this distrust towards, especially towards the United States and towards the West in general, can complicate any mission of trying to reconcile different groups in Egypt, especially the Muslim Brothers and the military. And the sixth and last conclusion I can suggest to you is that, of course, the Muslim Brothers, they proved to be inefficient and in managing the society and confronting a lot of challenges and risks existing in such a difficult country and as Egypt. It doesn't mean that the military or whoever comes can easily solve these problems. So the next point is where I want to make some comments is, so what's going to happen with the Islamists? So some people believe that the Islamists will soon join their Arab nationalist or communist predecessors, leftist predecessors in the dustbin of history. I believe it's not so. I think it's very premature to judge, but it's true that the positions of the political Islam in this country and all over the region is becoming weaker and is seriously damaged. Coming back to the Muslim Brothers, I can mention that the movement, of course, is not going to disappear. It is still enjoying the support of some of a very significant segment of the Egyptian society. There can happen a split within the Muslim Brotherhood, or they can do it by intention, by purpose, to send people somewhere else. They had some very sophisticated experience of doing so, working through different parties during the rule of Mubarak and Sadat. And but the main reason is that the main question is whether they are still are sticking to the electoral democracy paradigm. The main debate within the Islamists all over the Arab world, as far as I know now, is whether the Muslim Brothers should come back to the to the paradigm of caliphate instead of electoral democracy. As I said, they feel deceived, they feel betrayed, and probably the failure of the distrust towards this democratic paradigm, which was overwhelming for the Muslim Brothers and very important for the transformation or transition, democratic transition period in the Middle East, it's under threat now. Because if some people of radical views, of very close to the Salafi views, prevail in the recent, in this leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood, and decide even to accept the paradigm of so-called martyr project, go for a bloody contest, it will be extremely bad for the future of Egypt and for the whole region. So the next question here is about why the military attacked unexpectedly, are attacking Hamas and accusing Morsi of having conspired with its leaders. I think it's also probably a bit damaging the military, because General Sisi has already a reputation of so-called friend of Israel, a friend of the United States, which is not good for certain segments of the society given the situation there. But there might be, in my view, some serious considerations of the part of General Sisi and the group of military, the army. So first is to give a good message to the Israelis, hoping that through their channels in the US, in the public opinion in the US, they can give a signal to the US administration to accept the military and not to consider it a coup, and to preserve channels for military aid and financial aid to Egypt, which is extremely important for Egypt now. What is happening? Now, the second thing is, so I'm not in favor of any conspiracy theories, but I am trying to understand the logic to why Hamas, why Morsi has conspired with Hamas, which is rubbish. So the next thing is to help Obama, and especially Mr. Kerry, to kick off this peace process, which is starting now, despite the opposition of Hamas. So Hamas is a bit discredited by the military and by the interim president, Adli Mansour in Egypt, and it opened the floor for this peace process once again. So I think it was the intention of the Egyptian military. And third, it is to prevent Palestinians from forming a coalition structure with a technocratic government, which was on the road. They were ready for forming this coalition government because between Hamas and Fatah. So it failed. Now it's failing. And because of this position, new Egyptian authorities, and also giving more opportunities to Abu Mazen, to continue this process with the Israelis. So about then the next point about Russia. So as I mentioned, Russia's relationship with political Islam was a bit complicated, controversial. On the one hand, we maintained relations with the organization that didn't have any other agendas but local ones, like Hamas and Hezbollah and so on, because they're not harming and not intervening into our internal situation in Russia, which is important for us because we are a multi-confessional society. We have a lot of Muslim, we have a Muslim community of around 20 million people. And, but the Muslim Brothers, so this is on the one hand. On the other hand, there are organizations like Muslim Brotherhood, despite the fact that they are quite moderate, they are still on the list of extremist organizations. So relations with Hamas were regarded not only by Moscow, but by many of our partners as our useful asset. And it helped us also to neutralize some negative attitudes of the political Islamic movements towards some of our policies. I think it's clear. On the other hand, considering Muslim Brothers an extremist organization on the blacklist was due to several facts which are known to you. First, that the Muslim Brothers in general provided volunteers and financial support to the Chechen rebels during some period of time, not now. and supported other militant groups in the Northern Caucasus. Second, missionaries from the Muslim Brothers branches were professing the version of Islam that contradicted or confronted the prevailing beliefs in the Russian Muslim society, Hanafi Turks or Shafi'i Caucasians, and a lot of Sufi orders. They were represented, and third, they were representing the Middle East Islam, which was not very popular within the Russian Muslim community, extremely politicized, which was going against the secular character of the Russian state. The situation became even more tense with the flow of the graduates of Islamist, Islamic institutions, educational institutions into Russia during last years. Some of them extremely intolerant and bringing radical ideas to our country. So they brought, and also through the Muslim Brothers, some other organizations, migrants from Central Asia who came as laborers to Russia, also brought these radical ideas. And given the fact that our legislation is very liberal in comparison with many Middle Eastern or Central Asian states, and these people can live in our country and can do some, can professing some radical ideas that are extremely bad. As a result of that, we can see that we have some people from Russia, some militants from Russia that are going to Afghanistan, to Syria, to fight within the militant groups against Assad government or working against the Western targets in these countries, against the US, against Iran, against Karzai government. It's the Shia government in Iraq. It's amazing that these guys are confronting both the United States, Britain, the West in general, Assad, Karzai, and so on and so forth. And extremely in Iraq, because they believe that the United States and Iran paradoxically are supporting the Malikist government, against the interests of the Sunni majority. So by our official figures given by our government, by the head of Federal Security Service, is saying that we have about 200 people from Russia fighting in Syria now, in the ranks of the militants. Of course, it's much less than the people from here, from the European Union, especially from Belgium and France, who are occupying the first places there, but still it's enough for us, especially envisaging what's going to happen after they come back. So coming back to my last point about, I think, it's okay? Yeah, good. Coming to my last point about certain scenarios. I think that the scenario of civil war cannot be totally excluded in Egypt, but as I said, I have some hopes that it cannot happen. But still, the full-scale chaos and violence is one of the worst scenarios, especially if the Muslim Brothers vote now after these discussions. Of course, they are hiding out somewhere and discussing these things. Some of them are arrested in the absence of very important figures of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they cannot probably make final conclusions. But if they subscribe to the notion of this, armed confrontation or not only sit-in strategy in favor of attracting the support of many people abroad, I think this situation of chaos will be inevitable. There is also a scenario of national reconciliation, or probably some agreement about power sharing among different groups and different political parties, including national Arab nationalists, who are on the rise now, because we can see for the first time in Egypt we can see portraits of Gamal Abdel Nasser demonstrators taking with them portraits of almost forgotten Nasser. We have some leftists, we have secularists, we have liberals, we have pro-Western democratically oriented young people, well educated and well connected with international structures. So this power sharing or reconciliation scenario is feasible, but it also depends on the goodwill of the actors, the main actors, and of the economic situation. Now, several countries are supported. So if I come back to the issue of this strange geopolitical situation, the Saudi Arabia supported the coup. The first state who supported the military coup was the king of Saudi Arabia, immediately. In 2 hours after the appointment of interim president, he congratulated him. The King Abdullah congratulated Adli, and they promised to provide $5 billion of help. The Kuwait and the United Emirates, the same. Qatar, who was not in line with this, because Qatar is supporting Muslim Brothers, in order to be, to take the position of his brothers within the GCC, of course, Qatar also promised not to stop aid, though the Qataris are very critical towards this action. It's damaging the reputation of the Qataris, who have been supporting, of course, the Muslim Brothers. We can also mention certain scenarios like the prolonged state of this interim state of the military rule. We don't know whether the elections under the international pressures can be held, quickly, or in February, in March, or whatever. I don't know, and it's not easy. So again, one of the best scenarios is, of course, coming back to the democratic procedures in the elections. But for me, it's clear that any sort of such a system will be, so if we say democracy or something like that, it will be military controlled. So the military cannot give up their control over the government. It's clear. And the Muslim Brothers are not going to disappear. So how could reconcile these forces, how to provide some sort of a system that can be workable? So it's, I think, our common perspective for all global international forces, including the West, including Russia. And our estimation was cautious, as you can judge from the official statements of the Russian officials. So we considered Mursi as democratically elected president. This was not so. This military coup was not greeted. So you can find in the comments by the Russian strategic analysts that it's the coup is named a coup and nothing else. But still, I think that we can envisage some sort of fruitful cooperation between Russia and the West in trying to find a solution not to destabilize the whole region where we have common interests. Thank you.
Professor Namkin, thank you very much. Excellent presentation that ranged very broadly, a dissection of the Egyptian internal dynamics, but also a look at some of the regional fallout of recent events there, and also some perspectives on Russian-Egyptian relations. I'd like to open it up to questions on any or all of those themes. First gentleman to catch my eye. Please, if you could state your name, your question, because we're recording this, I will actually repeat your question, and then over to Professor Namkin.
Kumar, member of the 52. Thank you. I'm still puzzled as to what it is that Morsi could have done differently in order to prevent the coup taking place. Because you mentioned that failure to destroy secure, the state. That wasn't on within a year. Same was true of the economic problems. No one could have solved all the economic problems in 1 year. But you mentioned that Muslim Brotherhood was inefficient in dealing with things. So is that all that accounts for? Or is that the military was using that inefficiency and the fallout from the failure to solve economic problems to promote their own agenda and regain control and thereby appease Israel and indirectly the United States on the Palestinian issue.
Okay, so
Yeah.
very briefly,
Yeah.
what more could Morsi have done in light of the entrenched deep states, the scale of the economic problems, and some of the strategic considerations?
So, I think in brief, there are, of course, I can envisage some, though it's very difficult to say what anyone should have done, but I think there is bad scenario, which is confronting the deep state, trying to do what Mr. Erdogan did against the military in Turkey, trying to weaken them, to undermine their interests economically, and to start some sort of substantial pressures,
Yes.
which is bad, of course.
Yeah, 10 years.
Yeah, but anyhow. But for this strategy, though I'm not in favor of such a strategy, but hypothetically, you know, we need to have some measure of economic success.
Yes.
And without economic success, you cannot do that. So the second option is to abstain from this Ikhwanization, not speeding up the change of the constitution, not to monopolize power, but instead to build a broad coalition of actors, attracting some of the secular parties, attracting people like, I don't know, Amr Musa or whoever is there, some people who went, given the very narrow majority of the people who voted, you know, for instance, Ahmad Shafiq, who was a part of the old regime, got a bit less than President Morsi and could have been elected under other circumstances. That's it.
Thank you. Lady there, please.
Yes, Patricia Ellis, Women's Foreign Policy Group. Two questions, one about the United States, one about Russia. Given the general distrust of the United States from all quarters in Egypt, how important do you think the decision on the coup was so that aid can continue to flow? And in terms of Russia, how do you feel the Russian policy in support of Assad will influence the Russian clout in Egypt?
Right. So questions were
Several questions.
U.S. policy and the question of how important aid was in the decision on coup recognition or not, and then secondly on Russian policy, how in the light of
Yeah.
disputes over Syria, Russian clout stands.
So, first, I think it's important because the U.S. aid to, I think the last year was $1.7 billion. Without that, the Egyptian military, even especially the army, cannot survive. So that's why the U.S. supporting Egypt in general and trying to escape chaos. They cannot recognize it, characterize it as a coup, because otherwise the Congress will not, you know all that, will stop all aid. It's extremely essential. So in general, as I mentioned, by helping the U.S. in starting, and Mr. Kerry in kicking off this peace process between the Israelis and Palestinians, I think the generals are buying time for this transition and preparing for the coming back to democratic electoral system. For Russia, I think despite the fact that what I mentioned about the Russian attitude towards political Islam, there was a real breakthrough when Mr. Putin invited Morsi to visit Russia. It was very unexpected. It came very quickly because Putin first met President Morsi in Durban in South Africa during the BRICS summit. And then in April, Morsi came to Russia. He discussed with Russia several important projects in different fields, in the fields of oil and gas, and the field of constructing of nuclear power stations in Egypt. And he asked for some financial help as well. So, but this process, in my view, was a real breakthrough in the relationship between Russia and the political Islam, and especially the Muslim Brothers in the Arab world. But it stopped with the military coup. Of course, there is, as far as our policy towards the situation in Syria are concerned, of course there are contradictions between us and many forces, especially political Islamist forces in the Sunni forces in the Arab world. But I don't think it's dramatic for the present situation, especially given what's going on. I think the situation in Egypt is more or less discrediting the positions of some political Islamist Sunni organizations, but still we're continuing to provide in the field of, for instance, civil society, good relations with many parties. For instance, I mentioned to you that several months ago we had the meetings of so-called Valdai Club, which is a Russian umbrella organization similar to IISS, and it was held in Marrakesh. And so the people organized by us, and so a lot of people from different Islamist organizations came there. We were discussing the situation in the Middle East there. And despite the differences on the Syrian question, the Syrian crisis, it went very smoothly. And so we have this dialogue which is going on.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Again, I would want to ask something about the Muslim Brothers. It seems to me that when you look at the evolution of the Muslim Brothers, they become, they are searching for ways, this is over time, of how to proceed. They go through the period of Nasser, and they come out of that. Now, it seems to me that what happens along the way is that they are they're moderate. They are moderate, and there are others within them that are in a hurry. So you get a lot of schisming off from the brothers into more radical, jihadi, etc. groups. And in a way, you could say that the brothers, being moderate, have sort of been the godfather of these more radical groups. Now then, but they stuck to their guns, it strikes me, and perhaps the mistake was deciding to put a candidate for president when they said they wouldn't do so. Okay, let me move on. I wonder what impact this will have on the younger Muslim Brothers and other young Islamists when they see that the democratic approach does not seem to work for them. And in a way, could one not say that in Syria you can see you see an influx of people coming in all directions, and it could be an extremely negative effect for younger Islamists. And I just wonder if you have any kind of take on that.
Okay, so question about the evolution of Muslim Brotherhood, fragmenting of it, and relations between Muslim Brotherhood and some more radical groups, and whether there is a godfather or patron relationship there, and then.
Well, there's a young Frenchman that I ran across when the Americans went into Iraq, and they didn't take care of manning the borders or anything, and this Frenchman comes in from Iran without papers or anything, wanders around interviewing every Islamist group he can find, and he did a grid, and he discovered that 9 out of 10 had schismed off from the Muslim Brothers, that they had originally been with the Muslim Brothers. So it just strikes me that whenever I met him at an ISA conference. Now, I wonder if, this is an indication of the fact that in our current situation, it's going to have a profoundly negative effect with individuals going off to fight, coming back in the same kind of model that we had with Afghanistan.
Okay. The question is it a point of no return for the younger generation of Muslim Brotherhood activists? They might turn away from democratic practice.
Yes, that's what I meant, by the way, that there is not only with the young generation, but there are some people from the middle-age generation who are criticizing this option of nonviolence and democracy, and building their strategy on the electoral process. But let's not ignore also some other groups like the Salafis, who are feeling that they are the winners in this situation. So there is a general danger of radicalization in the Middle East in general, which is related not only with what's going on in Egypt, but also, first of all, in Syria, where even the numbers that are officially almost the estimation which is given by some institutions within the European Union is 6,000 foreign fighters fighting against the Assad regime as militants, Al-Qaeda related people affiliated with Al-Qaeda. I think it might be more even if we have 200 people only from Russia coming, and the French are giving us 140 fighters. I think it's much more. And I'm afraid that when these people, they come back to Europe, it will be a disaster for the European Union, because to prevent using this, the same that happened in Afghanistan, I think we might be witnessing a real explosion of this new explosion of Islamic radicalism and terrorism. And as far as generally the Egyptian Islamists are concerned, I'm not as pessimistic, because from my meetings with some young generation people from An-Nur party, from the Salafis, I found them, though of course they are conservative, some of them are radical, but they are not jihadists, they are very well educated, they are charismatic, and there is some hope that probably if the situation is not developing in the realm of this worst scenario, on the path of this scenario, I think there might be certain evolution of this young generation, because they want to live peacefully, they want education, they want development, they want participation, and not necessarily jihad or being martyrs for some ideological reasons.
Robert Fox, please.
Robert, I'm just going to ask you, following the radical route, if I could say, fascinating you mentioning that King Abdullah was the first to endorse the coup. What then is the role of the sect, of the Wahhabi sect, which has been very prominent in my travels in the Maghreb and is still there? And I very much take what you're saying about the tendency in the diaspora of the Muslim Brotherhood and its message since foundation by Hassan al-Banna. Because look what is happening to Qutubism through Al-Qaeda. That is atomized and shattering.
Right.
Now, is the shattering effect going to be mitigated against your, I'm rather surprised at your moderate optimism that the radical, articulate young Egyptians, also in my experience, actually want to build something. They're not there to destroy. The atomization effect, which your country has suffered from, we to a much lesser extent, that you see with whatever the third, fourth generation of Al-Qaeda is at the moment, this would militate against that. But could you speak a little about where you see the hidden power in so much Saudi activity, I mean unofficial Saudi activity in the Wahhabite sect, where that may be going now, right across the region, particularly, as you rightly alluded to, Iraq as well?
Thank you. Yeah. So the question was about Saudi policy, recognition of the coup, and then the undercurrent of the Wahhabi having a rather different agenda, and then how official policy and this unofficial policy interact.
I think there might be several considerations behind this policy. So, of course, the Saudis are in favor of this Wahhabi radical trend of Islam and supporting it anywhere. But the official establishment in Saudi Arabia are not supporting the jihadists, because they are suffering from jihadists themselves. But they are interested in portraying the Wahhabi sort of Islam, the Wahhabi trend of Islam, as peaceful, as they are trying to tell us, and not as much politicized as the Muslim Brotherhood. But behind this, we can, beyond this, rhetorics, you can find very acute competition between the Muslim Brothers and the Salafis. The Salafis are supported by the Saudi Arabia. They invested a lot of efforts and a lot of money in order to support the Salafi groups, because it will be the main channel for providing the Saudi influence all over the Islamic world, to be very frank, in my view. And on the other hand, the Muslim Brothers were supported by some other forces. First of all, the Qataris, were the main supporters of the Muslim Brothers everywhere. So I think that probably the main explanation of this Saudi activity towards this the military, or position towards the military coup, is that probably, I might be mistaken, but that it can open opportunities for a Nur party and their counterparts for winning the elections, if there is again the electoral process, and to legitimize the Wahhabi version of Islam, which has been severely criticized all over the world, in the West, and of course in Russia it's clear, because the Wahhabis are the main adversary of the Hanafi tolerant Islam in Russia, and there is acute ideological struggle between this the supporters of this Wahhabi Islam, who are coming by certain numbers in Russia, trying to change the situation in the Islamic community. So I think the main reason why the Saudis did that was their motivation, their desire to support the Salafis and to help them to rise to power and to provide channels for establishing new order in the Middle East in favor of the Saudis, and not in favor of Turkey and Qatar, which are friends to Saudi Arabia, but at the same time competitors ideologically, religiously, and economically as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Professor, thank you. Jonathan Worthington, Royal Navy. You made the quite arresting observation that many Islamicists will feel deceived and betrayed by electoral democracy as a result of what has taken place. And even looking at places like Turkey, we see something of a shift away from secularism. I'm wondering, is there any cause for hope or optimism that the secular model, secular democracy can work in the Islamic context?
Okay, so the question was, given the disappointments in democracy in Egypt, is there any hope for secularism?
Given what happened in Egypt, I think there is some hope. I couldn't have imagined such a broad, mass movement of supporters of the alternative, way to rule the country against the majority of the supporters of the Muslim Brothers, when millions of people came to the streets once more, demonstrating against this the process of Ikhwanization or Islamization. So it means that the secular trend in this part of the world is very capable of continuing this transformation or transition, but it depends again on the measure of the economic success they can provide in such a country like Egypt, which is #1 in the Arab world, and everybody is following the example of it. It will be the main lesson learned from that. If it fails once more, and if the winner will be radical Islam, it will be a disaster.
Let me ask a question.
Yep.
Given the strength of opposing forces and the depth of division in society, as you've laid out in your talk, is Egypt governable?
It's a tough question. I don't know whether Egypt is governable. Of course, it's not governable without massive foreign aid, first of all. They need aid. But the problem is, even if they can get this Now the GCC is giving them $12 million, you know, 5 from Saudi Arabia, 4 from Kuwait, 3 from United Arab Emirates. Qatar will continue supporting the regime and a lot of other states. And but it's not enough. You need investment, you need projects, you need tourism. And who's going to invest in Egypt under these circumstances? So you need security, you need guarantees, and you need you know, whatever is needed to secure your money, you know, you invest. So it depends. Jobs, it's very difficult.
Can I ask a quick one? Thank you very much for raising the whole question of equalization. You won't be at all surprised to hear it has played absolutely, virtually no part in the serious discussion of the BBC, even the Financial Times, well-known commentator David Gardner. I have not seen him mention in the last 3 months, maybe he's here, forgive him if I produced it, equalization. It seems to be terribly vital what you're discussing. If I could just indulge in a brief anecdote. Quite peculiarly, 10 days ago, I found myself in an upstairs room in the East End of London with only one other UK journalist discussing Hizb-ut-Tahrir's vision for an economic utopia under the caliphate. Half of their discussion, I didn't know where I was, it was caliphate would own land, would own women, would own gold, would own silver, would get away with, we would no longer lend money, and everything would be common property. But half of their discussion was not against David Smith of the Sunday Times, my colleague, and myself. It was about the equalization program of President Morsi, that they saw as much as an enemy as what was coming from the West. Now, could you tell us a little bit about what you see Morsi was doing with equalization?
Question was the equinization policy of Morsi, and it might be helpful for some people if you could first describe what equinization is.
I think it's, I need more time in order to explain everything about equinization, but in general, there are certain areas where this equinization was happening. So first was political sphere. So that is bringing, it's a bit similar to what the military were doing in the 50s and the 60s, putting their people all over the important posts and commanding the whole system. You know, the same, the Ikhwans, bringing Ikhwans everywhere. For instance, and not only Ikhwans, but some of the people who were close to Ikhwan, commanding certain regions, parts of Egypt, and certain spheres of the economic and political life. For instance, so-called Al-Jama'a al-Islamiyya, Islamic group, which used to be the most militant, who killed tourists in '97 in Luxor. So then they decided to be peaceful and to sign up for democracy as well. But someone from the leadership of Al-Jama'a al-Islamiyya was appointed governor for Luxor under President Morsi. And it was extremely bad. It was typical for Morsi, you know, to ignore the measure of discontent, especially on the part of for instance, of the Christians, whom they tried to attract, you know, to make allies, to build a relationship. But in the field of everyday life, related to the new constitution that didn't provide enough rights for women, didn't provide enough rights for minorities. It was another field where Morsi provided this equalization process. And the third thing, which is important, the field of economy, where the representatives from the Muslim Brotherhood tried to get the upper hand in the business, and trying to take over businesses from other people. You know, I think there are some other points as well, but this is some examples of the equalization process.
Okay. Well,
But in general, it's the idea of creating a new type of state. So the intellectuals in Egypt whom I met, they said they are very quickly trying to build a new state here, a new system. And it was understandable. The people understood that. And that was why they opposed it.
Last question goes to the lady in front row, please.
When looking at the Egyptian military's behavior ever since the coup and the recent call for mass protests on Friday by General El-Sisi, I was wondering how rationally is the military behaving right now with fulfilling the goals of securing Egyptians' economic and security interests when incarcerating political opponents, with the backlash against Syrian refugees, and with the recent violent clashes and the recent deaths among the Muslim Brotherhood. So I was wondering, are we seeing a transition back to democratic processes, or is General El-Sisi establishing himself as a military strongman, and are we seeing a kind of backwards trend?
I understand.
Military dictatorship?
Coming back to the military, old military system.
Exactly.
We don't know. But still there are some signs of this sort of option, because just killing people who are demonstrating in favor of the Muslim Brothers is not the best thing to do. You need some, also, you need dialogue with the Muslim Brothers who are not disappearing, you know, they will remain. And the alternative is worse. Salafis, conservatives, radicals, probably jihadists as well. But still I have some hope that probably the military, first of all, they cannot rule the country because they cannot solve the economic problems. That's one of my main ideas about what. And second, they are not willing to come back to the old, the days of the old regime of Mubarak or Sadat. But I think Sisi wants to demonstrate that he's strong enough. All these guys, they want to be strong, and they believe that you cannot govern this country unless you're considered to be strong and you are capable to make tough decisions, and you can oppose any sort of actions against you. That's it.
Professor Namkin, thank you very much. I must bring it to a halt here. I have one note for your diary. Tomorrow, 12:30 at Bloomsbury House, so 5 minutes up Kingsway from here. The Gordian Knot of Organised Crime, Violent Conflict and Human Security with Vanda Felbab-Brown of Brookings. So if you want your fix of drugs and thugs, that's the place to go. And if you'd like to go and see that, you can either email events@iss.org or see one of my colleagues outside if you're not already registered. All that remains to me is to say thank you very much to Professor Namkin for coming here, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you.